Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast. This week's episode is titled, Provide Context When You Share Data. As I record this episode, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and as I watch the news, listen to the radio, read blog posts, read all kinds of information related to the pandemic and what's happening in the world, I see all kinds of news coverage about the number of people with the illness, the number of people who have died as a result of the illness, the number of tests for the illness that have been administered, the number of tests that we need to have in inventory, the number of respirators, hospital beds, gloves, and masks that are needed in a certain area of the country, the number of respirators, hospital beds, gloves, and masks that the state of California is purchasing, the number of respirators, hospitals, gloves, and masks that are missing from the national stockpile, the number of meals delivered to kids who are out of school, the number of Wi-Fi hotspots that have been set up in our county, the number of restaurants that have closed nationwide or in my community, the number of dollars injected into the economy, the number of people out of work or filing for unemployment, the number of dollars allocated for small business loans. Frankly, I'm swimming in numbers. And I'm a numbers person. Honestly, I'm having trouble keeping up with all of the numbers and data that's swirling around, and what am I supposed to do with it? What kind of decision am I supposed to make? How do these numbers affect my daily decisions about how I live my life and how I conduct my business and how I do things to help keep my family safe? And what do I do that puts my family at risk? And so many other questions that are supposed to be answered by the numbers. And the point of this podcast episode is not to cast judgment on or to really draw conclusions for what these numbers tell us. It's to make this point. Most people, frankly, don't think in numbers. And even the ones who do need to know the context the numbers are offered in order to interpret them and make sense of them. A number in and of itself is, frankly, pointless. It means nothing without a comparison number. Remember that the point of leadership communication, the point of this podcast, the point of talking like a leader, is about more than just giving information to people. It's about learning how to communicate in a way that helps people make informed decisions about their actions. It's about communicating in a way that inspires or moves people to action. It's about communicating in a way so that a bigger context can be understood by the person with whom you're communicating. You see, without me having to do lots of independent research, when I hear about the number of respirators or hospital beds or gloves or masks are needed in a certain area of the country or even needed in the county in which I live, I have no way of knowing or understanding whether that number that is reported on the news is meaningful or not. Is that big or is it little? Is that out of the ordinary or is it just kind of normal? I don't know. I don't live and work in that world. I don't know how many thousands of respirators are typically needed in the country every week. I don't know how many hospital beds are in my county's inventory. That's not the world I live in. Useful data would tell me we need so many respirators and that exceeds current demand by this much, or this is an increase in normal supply of 190% or 1,000% or 5,000% or whatever the number is. I'm not really trying to pass judgment on the effort to convey information. What I'm suggesting is, as leaders, we need to communicate in ways that help the person receiving the information know how to interpret, apply, and act on the information we give them. So given that most people, frankly, don't operate in numbers, and if I'm communicating with numbers to members of my team that come from outside their world, like marketing numbers, if I'm communicating numbers that come from my team, outside my team, like I'm communicating specific specifications or I'm communicating number of units I produced in a certain shift outside my team with people who don't really know what that number means, I have to remember to provide context so people know how to interpret the number. With that in mind, I'm going to share some ideas to help you as a leader know how to share information, share data with people so it sticks and improves the odds that people actually know what to do with that data. And the first thing I've already given a clue for is give people context. When I offer a number, is this a normal range for the number or is this an abnormal range for the number? For example, if I typically make 1,000 units per shift and in the most recent shift we made 997, saying 997 units is not that remarkable. 997 when we typically make 1,000, that's useful to understand. Or if I just abstractly say, we made 1,500 units today, that also by itself means nothing. 1,500 units when we normally make 1,000. Now that means something. So remember to provide context for any data you offer to people. Remember, especially when you're bringing information to people who don't operate in the context where these numbers are well understood. Provide context for people. What's normal? And how is this different from what you would expect to see? Or how is it like what you would expect to see? And really think about what is the right way to view this number. Is the absolute number the right way to view it, or as a percentage of some population, or percentage of normal, or compared to average? Is that a better way to present the data? Remember how to present the data so that the person receiving the information knows exactly what that number means. And remember, the number by itself means nothing. The number only means something when it's compared to another number. Now, here are 3 other tips to keep in mind for when you're sharing information with people. Remember what are called the 3 R's for sharing data. Remember to reduce, round, and replace. Reduce means when you're sharing data, reduce it to the minimum number of pieces of data necessary to make your point. As I was listening to a press conference recently, again, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, I heard a litany of numbers, number after number after number. I was swimming. I was like, I don't really, these numbers sound big, and I don't really know what that means. So reduce the number of numbers you use to the minimum necessary to make your point. Where it's possible, round them off. If you've got 79.7%, that's close enough to 80, or it's 4 out of 5, or it's 8 out of 10. So round it off to a thing that's easier for people to hold on to. Don't take it out to the 2nd or 3rd decimal point. And then if you're using numbers that are very, very large or very, very small, remember to replace them with things that are in the person, in the hearer's physical realm of understanding. For example, there are very few people who understand how big a micron is. It's 10 to the minus 6th, or 1/1,000,000th of a meter. And if I said something was 75 or 100 microns big, most people would say, okay, I don't really know what that means. But I could say instead, this thing we're talking about is roughly the size of a human hair, because the average human hair is around 75 microns, plus or minus a little bit. Or I could say something is 20 microns big. A different way to say that would be, it's about as thick as a coffee filter. So the idea here is to replace data with something that is meaningful for the person in their physical realm of the environment. That usually applies with really, really big and really, really small numbers. The list of ways you can make numbers stick better and truly use numbers to influence people's actions so that they can make informed decisions goes beyond what I've talked about here. It goes to ways you present it in terms of graphical representation instead of just verbal representation, and a number of other specific tips that could help you. I think the thing I want you to take away from the conversation today is remember that numbers by themselves don't really mean that much. In order for people to know what to do with numbers, to know how to make an informed decision about their actions, people really need to know the context the numbers fit within. So when you're trying to talk like a leader, remember that anytime you provide data, provide information to people in the form of numbers, make sure you also provide the relevant context that makes that data make sense. If you'll provide context for your data, you can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.